He would be just like you, Mom would cry, forcing me to wear his things. Yesterday, I found a room in the basement, with a bed, textbooks, and a diary written in handwriting that looked exactly like mine. The last entry, today Mom called me by his name again. I've been living this nightmare for as long as I can remember, but I never understood what was really happening until yesterday. Let me start from the beginning because this is going to sound completely insane. Growing up, I always thought my twin brother died when we were 7. Mom would break down crying whenever she talked about him, which wasn't often, but when she did, she'd pull out these boxes of clothes that supposedly belonged to him. Navy blue sweaters that smelled like mothballs, jeans with patches on the knees, sneakers that were always just slightly too big for my feet. She'd make me wear them around the house, especially on what she called his birthday, which was also mine, obviously, since we were twins. The worst part was how she'd look at me when I wore his clothes. Her eyes would get this distant, glazed look, and she'd start talking to me like I was him. She'd ask me about homework I'd never done, friends I'd never met, memories I'd never made. When I tried to correct her, she'd get this scary quiet and just stare at me until I played along. It was easier to pretend than to deal with her breakdowns. I spent my entire childhood feeling like I was living in someone else's shadow. Mom would compare everything I did to what he supposedly would have done. If I got a B on a test, she'd say he would have gotten an A. If I didn't want to eat vegetables, she'd tell me how much he loved broccoli. It was like I could never be good enough because I wasn't him. The house always felt wrong too. There were these weird gaps in our family photos, spaces where it looked like someone had been carefully cut out. Mom's bedroom had 2 dressers, but she only used one. The basement was always locked, and she'd get furious if I even went near the door. She said it was just storage, but I could sometimes hear weird sounds coming from down there, footsteps, muffled voices, things being moved around. Friends at school would ask about my family, and I never knew what to say. How do you explain that your mom talks to your dead twin through you? How do you tell people that sometimes you feel like you're not even real, just a replacement for someone better? I stopped bringing friends over because Mom's behavior was too embarrassing and confusing to explain. High school was particularly brutal. Mom would have these episodes where she'd dress me up in his old clothes and take pictures, arranging me in poses that felt familiar but strange, like I was recreating moments I'd never lived. She'd show me photo albums with pictures of a boy who looked exactly like me, doing things I swore I remembered doing, but the memories felt fuzzy and wrong. The really messed up part was how natural it all felt sometimes. When I wore his clothes, I'd catch myself acting differently, walking with a different posture, laughing at things that weren't funny to me, even craving foods I normally hated. Mom would get so happy during these moments, and part of me wanted to make her happy, even if it meant disappearing a little bit more each time. Update 1. Yesterday changed everything. Mom was out running errands, and I was home alone, which rarely happened. I was doing laundry in the basement when I noticed something weird about the wall behind the water heater. There was this seam that didn't match the rest of the paneling, and when I pushed on it, part of the wall swung inward like a hidden door. Behind it was a room I'd never seen before. Not just any room. It was like a mirror image of my bedroom upstairs. Same layout, same furniture, even the same posters on the walls, but everything was slightly different. The bed was made with sheets I'd never seen. There were textbooks for classes I'd never taken, and on the desk was a diary bound in leather that looked exactly like one I remembered having when I was younger, except I couldn't remember what happened to mine. My hands were shaking as I opened the diary. The handwriting was mine. I was absolutely certain of it. But the entries were about a life I'd never lived. School days I didn't remember, conversations with friends whose names I didn't recognize, arguments with Mom that sounded familiar but felt like they'd happened to someone else. The entries went back years, starting from when we were about 8. The early ones were normal kid stuff, complaining about homework, talking about cartoons, typical elementary school drama. But as I kept reading, they got darker and more confused. Entries about feeling like he was forgetting things, about Mom calling him by the wrong name, about days where he'd wake up and not remember going to sleep. One entry from when we were 12 really got to me. I don't understand what's happening to me. Sometimes I feel like I'm watching my life happen to someone else. Mom keeps showing me pictures of things I supposedly did, but I don't remember doing them. She says I'm just confused, that the treatments are helping, but I feel like I'm disappearing. Treatments? What treatments? I kept reading, and the entries became more frantic, more desperate. He wrote about being kept in this room for days at a time, about Mom bringing him meals and telling him he needed to rest, that he was sick. He wrote about hearing someone else upstairs, living his life, going to his school, sleeping in his bed. The last entry was dated just 3 days ago. Today, Mom called me by his name again. She does this more and more now. I tried to remind her who I am, but she just looked at me with that blank expression and told me I was confused. I can hear him upstairs sometimes, and it sounds like he's living the life I'm supposed to have. I don't know how much longer I can do this. I don't know who I am anymore. I had to sit down. My legs felt like jelly, and I couldn't breathe properly. This diary was written by someone who thought they were me, or who thought I was them. Someone who'd been living in this basement room while I lived upstairs, both of us apparently unaware of the other's existence most of the time. I started looking through the rest of the room more carefully. The closet was full of clothes exactly like mine, but older and more worn. The bookshelf had all the same books I remembered reading as a kid, but with notes in the margins I didn't remember writing. Under the bed, I found a box of medical documents that made my blood run cold. Update 2. The medical documents were the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. Reports from doctors I'd never met, describing treatments I'd never received for a condition I didn't know I had. The papers talked about something called enforced identity integration and controlled personality suppression. They described me, or him, or us as Subject B and talked about experimental therapeutic interventions designed to consolidate dual identity manifestation into a single, stable personality. There were charts tracking our behavior, noting when Subject B showed resistance to identity suppression and when Subject A demonstrated successful integration responses. The dates on these documents went back to when we were 7, right around the time Mom said my brother died. One report was particularly chilling. Subject B continues to demonstrate signs of personality fragmentation. Recommend continued treatment through forced identification protocols. Mother has been instructed to alternate subjects every 72 to 96 hours to prevent complete identity stabilization in either personality. This method has shown promising results in previous cases. Previous cases? How many other kids had they done this to? I found photographs hidden in the back of one of the medical folders, pictures of me and another boy who looked exactly like me, but we were never in the same photo. Some showed me in clothes I remembered wearing, doing things I remembered doing. Others showed the other boy in the same clothes, in the same places, but I had no memory of those moments. It was like someone had been documenting 2 separate lives being lived by the same person. The most disturbing part was finding Mom's handwritten notes in the margins of the medical reports. She'd been keeping track of which version of me was upstairs and which was downstairs, noting our different behaviors, preferences, and responses to what she called identity cues. She'd written things like A responds better to praise, B requires more forceful guidance, and B showed recognition of suppressed memories today. Increased basement time recommended. I realized that my entire life had been a lie. Those times when I'd felt different wearing his clothes, when I'd acted in ways that didn't feel like me, when Mom would look at me strangely, those weren't just weird family dynamics. I was literally being switched out with another version of myself, and neither of us knew it was happening. The really twisted part was that I started remembering things differently now. Flashes of being in this basement room, of Mom bringing me meals and telling me I needed to stay quiet, of hearing footsteps upstairs and wondering who was living my life. These memories felt real but distant, like they'd been buried under layers of confusion and manipulation. I don't know how she did it. The medical reports mentioned something about controlled memory suppression and pharmaceutical intervention, but the technical language was beyond me. What I did understand was that Mom had been deliberately keeping both versions of me confused and disoriented, making sure neither of us could form a complete picture of what was happening. I spent hours in that room, trying to piece together the timeline of my life, our lives. There were gaps in my memory that suddenly made sense. Days where I'd wake up feeling strange and disoriented. Times when Mom would reference conversations I couldn't remember having. I'd always assumed I was just forgetful or distracted, but now I realized those were the times when I'd been the one in the basement. The worst part was understanding that somewhere in this house, there was another version of me who'd been living through the same confusion and manipulation, but from the other side. Someone who thought of me the way I'd thought of my dead brother, as a shadow, a comparison, a ghost haunting his life. When I heard Mom's car in the driveway, I panicked. I shoved everything back where I'd found it and ran upstairs, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. Looking at Mom across the dinner table that night, I saw her completely differently. She wasn't the grieving mother I'd pitied and tried to comfort all these years. She was something much more frightening. Update 3. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept thinking about the diary entries, the medical reports, the photographs. I kept wondering where the other me was right now, whether he was lying in that basement room wondering the same things. I decided I had to stay awake and see what happened. I pretended to go to bed at my normal time, but I wedged a chair under my door handle and sat by the window, watching and waiting. Around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my room. The door handle turned, but the chair held it shut. I heard Mom's voice, soft and strange. "Time to switch, sweetheart. Your brother needs his turn now." When I didn't respond, she tried the handle again, more forcefully. Then I heard her walk away, and a few minutes later, I heard the basement door creak open. She was down there for almost an hour, and when she came back upstairs, I could hear her moving around in the hallway, doing something by my door. In the morning, I found a glass of orange juice outside my bedroom door with a note. "Drink this before you come down for breakfast. Love, Mom." The orange juice smelled wrong, too sweet, with a chemical undertone that made my stomach turn. I poured it down the bathroom sink and went downstairs. Mom was acting strange at breakfast, watching me carefully, asking weird questions about how I'd slept and whether I felt like myself. When I said I felt fine, she got this worried look and kept staring at me like she was trying to figure something out. I decided to test her. I started talking about memories from the diary, things the other me had written about that I shouldn't have known. I mentioned a teacher's name that I'd read about, a field trip I'd never been on, a conversation with a friend whose name I'd seen in the diary entries. Mom went completely pale. She stood up so fast she knocked over her coffee mug, and for a moment she looked genuinely scared. Then her expression shifted to something I'd never seen before, cold and calculating. She didn't say anything for the rest of the day, but I could feel her watching me constantly. When I came home from school, she was waiting in the living room with that same glass of orange juice and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That's when I realized I was in serious danger. Whatever had been happening to me and the other me all these years, Mom wasn't going to let it stop just because I'd figured it out. She'd been controlling us both for so long that our resistance probably felt like a threat to her entire world. I pretended to drink the orange juice, but I only let it touch my lips. Within minutes, I started feeling dizzy and confused, which told me there was definitely something in it. I played along, acting drowsy and disoriented, and Mom seemed to relax. She helped me upstairs to my room, tucking me into bed like I was a little kid. She was humming under her breath, and I recognized the tune. It was a lullaby she used to sing when I was small, back when I thought she was just a sad, lonely mother missing her dead son. As soon as I heard her go downstairs, I forced myself to stay awake despite the drugged feeling. I needed to get to that basement room and find the other me before Mom could complete whatever sick routine she'd been putting us through for years. Final update. I waited until the house was completely quiet, then snuck downstairs to the basement. The hidden door was closed, but when I pressed against it, it swung open easily. The room was dark, but I could see someone lying in the bed. It was like looking at myself sleeping, but wrong somehow. He was wearing pajamas I'd never seen before, and his hair was cut slightly different from mine. As I got closer, I could see that he was breathing, but his sleep seemed unnatural, too deep, too still. I shook his shoulder gently, and his eyes opened. For a moment, we just stared at each other in complete shock. It was the most surreal experience of my life, looking into a face that was exactly mine but belonged to someone else entirely. His first words were, "You're real. I thought you might be, but I wasn't sure anymore." We spent the next hour comparing our memories, trying to piece together what had been done to us. He remembered being upstairs sometimes, living my life, but those memories felt fuzzy and distant to him, just like my memories of being downstairs felt to me. We figured out that Mom had been drugging us both, using some kind of medication that made us compliant and confused, easy to move around and manipulate without us forming clear memories of what was happening. The most heartbreaking part was realizing how lonely we'd both been. We'd each been living half a life, always feeling like something was missing, always feeling like we weren't quite real. All those times I'd felt like I was living in someone else's shadow, I literally was. I was living in his shadow, and he was living in mine. We found more documents hidden in the room, legal papers that Mom had forged, creating a fake death certificate for him and gradually erasing any official record of his existence. She'd been planning this for years, slowly eliminating any trace that we'd ever been twins. The medical reports mentioned that the treatment was supposed to eventually result in complete personality integration, which I think meant she was planning to make one of us disappear permanently. When we heard Mom's footsteps on the basement stairs, we both froze. She was coming down earlier than usual, probably because she'd realized something was wrong. We had maybe 30 seconds before she'd find us both awake and together, which would ruin everything. My brother made a quick decision. He grabbed one of the medical syringes from a drawer and handed me a set of car keys I'd never seen before. He told me there was a car hidden in the garage behind some old furniture. Apparently, Mom had been using it to transport us when we were unconscious, moving us between the basement and upstairs without the neighbors seeing. The plan was simple but terrifying. When Mom came into the room, he'd inject her with whatever sedative she'd been using on us. I'd run upstairs and grab the evidence we'd need, the medical files, the photographs, the diary. Then we'd both get out of the house and drive to the police station. Mom appeared in the doorway just as we were getting into position. When she saw both of us awake and aware, her face went through this incredible transformation: surprise, fear, anger, and then something that looked almost like grief. For just a moment, she looked like the sad, confused mother I'd grown up with, and I almost felt sorry for her. But then she started talking, and her voice was different, colder and more clinical than I'd ever heard it. She told us we were sick, that we needed treatment, that we couldn't survive in the real world without her help. She said she'd been protecting us from ourselves, keeping us safe from the confusion and pain that came with being fractured. My brother didn't let her finish. He stepped forward with the syringe, and Mom realized what was happening. She tried to run, but the room was small, and she was trapped. When the sedative hit her system, she collapsed against the wall, looking up at both of us with an expression I'll never forget. Not anger or fear, but something like heartbreak. We got out of the house and drove straight to the police station. The hardest part was trying to explain what had happened to us. Even with all the evidence, it sounded completely insane. Two identical twins, one of whom had been declared dead years ago, both of whom had been kept drugged and isolated by their mother, living alternate lives without knowing it. The investigation took months. It turned out that Mom had been part of some kind of experimental program years ago, something that had been shut down after it was found to be using children as test subjects. She'd continued the treatments on her own, convinced that she was helping us, that we were too damaged to live normal lives. My brother and I are both in therapy now, real therapy, not whatever Mom was doing to us. We're trying to figure out who we are as separate people, which is harder than it sounds when you've spent your whole life being treated as two halves of the same person. The weirdest part is that we're different in ways we never expected. He's more outgoing than I am, funnier, better at making friends. I'm more serious, more focused, better at school. It's like Mom's attempt to make us into one person actually prevented us from becoming the individuals we were supposed to be. We're living with our aunt now, Mom's sister, who says she always suspected something was wrong, but never knew how to prove it. She's been incredibly patient with us as we try to rebuild our lives and figure out our own identities. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and for just a moment, I forget which one I am. But then I remember that I don't have to be either version of myself that Mom created. I can just be me, whoever that turns out to be. The house has been sold. I drove by it once a few weeks ago, and seeing it empty felt like waking up from a nightmare. All those years of confusion and manipulation, all that time spent feeling like I wasn't real, it's over now. Mom is in a psychiatric facility, and I don't know if we'll ever see her again. Part of me feels guilty about that, but my therapist says that's normal. She was still my mother, even though what she did to us was unforgivable. My brother and I are closer than most siblings, but we're also working on being our own people. We're going to different schools next year, pursuing different interests, making different friends. For the first time in our lives, we get to find out who we are when we're not living in each other's shadows. Yesterday, I woke up in my own bed, wearing my own clothes, with my own memories intact. It seems like such a simple thing, but after everything we've been through, it feels like a miracle. I know who I am now, and I know I'm real. That's something I never thought I'd be able to say.